But let's go back to, let's cast our minds, shall we, back to November of 2024. This is just after the election. Donald Trump had won handily all the swing states, as we're still regularly reminded, etc. Elon Musk was getting the people going. He was fostering excitement among his supporters and dread among his detractors. And here's one thing that he dangled in front of us that Doge would purportedly be doing. His PAC, called America PAC, complained, reasonably enough, that the Pentagon had failed its seventh audit in a row. The Pentagon, or Department of Defense, is notoriously immune to any kind of thoroughgoing auditing and seems to resemble, in terms of the overall federal budget, something like a black hole. And Musk was made abreast of this, and he said, haha, sounds like a job for Doge. A lot of people found this heartening, found this cause for optimism. Even Bernie Sanders, probably not the first guy that you would expect to come out and applaud Elon Musk, given Musk having acquired his position in government through the kinds of oligarchic interventions that Bernie Sanders day in and day out decries. Nonetheless, said that Musk was right. The Pentagon is a chronic failure in terms of minimal budgetary oversight. It loses track of billions of dollars. This should be right up Doge's alley if it's supposed to be promoting efficiency in the government, right? This should be perhaps even at the top of their list of priorities for what functions of the government to apply their energies to. Cenk Uygur, in the same little excited tweet thread, declared that he asked to be put in charge himself of this not yet existent, but maybe forthcoming project to audit the Pentagon. No offense to Cenk, I'm not sure why he would necessarily be the most apt choice for the role of Pentagon auditor in an Elon Musk Doge formation in the Trump administration, but hey, you got to respect the hustle, I suppose. And so let's fast forward now back to present. After all the fanfare, Elon Musk, in conjunction with Trump and other Republicans who were very enthused about this current administration, were saying that Doge was the Rosetta Stone to dismantle the deep state. Because among other things, finally, after all these years of bureaucratic inertia and waste and opacity, somebody would finally have the wherewithal or the stature to take a microscope to the Pentagon in a way that was necessary in order to expose its chronic misuse of public funds. Oops. Musk has now left the government, and spoiler alert, there has been no audit of the Pentagon. Now, given that Musk himself was always a prominent defense contractor, his companies like SpaceX contract with the Pentagon. He himself, meaning Musk, was on the receiving end of even classified contracts that the average citizen couldn't himself inspect. So it always seemed a little bit far-fetched to me that he would want to totally disrupt the standard operating procedure in the Pentagon, given that it at least partially subsidizes and enables his many projects, commercial projects, that is. But even if you were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he did have this big revelation and he felt this drive to use his unique wealth and unique political standing to go after the dastardly deep state. Well, he didn't do so. Now, Doge has done some other stuff, but the crown jewel of government waste, if that's how we want to conceptualize less than desirable government expenditures, was the Pentagon, and the Pentagon, more or less, was let off scot-free. What did Musk really spend a lot of time focusing on, and what did his Doge apparatus spend a lot of time really going at full throttle? Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, National Forest Service, Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, when I think of the deep state, I don't immediately think of, for instance, park rangers at a national park. Like if I want to stroll into Yosemite National Park or the Grand Canyon and have a friendly guy or gal tell me about the flora and fauna that are native to the park, I don't immediately think of that person in terms of their supposed allegiance with the deep state or their wily manipulation of state power in the way that one would associate with the deep state, if we're going to use that terminology. Nor do I really think of credit card regulators as emblematic of the deep state. Like, the government does a lot of stuff that isn't always self-evidently in the interests of ordinary people, but if they can at least marginally clamp down on like overdraft fees or on the ability of credit card companies to extract as much revenue as they possibly can from consumers, often egregiously, then I don't know. That's not an action necessarily I would immediately associate with the malevolent deep state. And the local VA, like the Veterans Administration, yeah, throughout the years, there have been complaints about the lack of efficiency in the Veterans Administration. Although I have to say that I have a very elderly grandfather who at times I have taken to get medical services at the VA, and mostly it's perfectly efficient. I'm not going to necessarily generalize my experience to everybody in the United States, but either way, even if there's an inefficient VA clinic someplace, is that the deep state that we were supposedly talking about? Is that the deep state that Musk and Trump and whomever else were inveighing against? Probably not. That deep state would have been more akin to, I don't know, the military-industrial complex, defense contractors, Pentagon expenditures that are not transparent enough that they can never be successfully audited, the intelligence agencies, like the sprawling surveillance apparatus, like that stuff would be more redolent of the so-called deep state, if that's a term that we're still going to use in normal parlance. But most of that side of the government seems to have been basically exempted from the most stringent of the Doge cuts. So what was Doge really in its essence? Was it about cutting the size of government? Was it about reducing deficits and reining in the national debt? Or was it some kind of revolutionary project? Because a lot of people, as I recall, were super excited about this Doge effort as though it would overturn every assumption that any of us had ever had about the nature of how a government could be run. But according to Musk himself, although on the one hand he'll say, yeah, Doge is somehow going to dismantle the deep state, we're going to do bold and audacious stuff like auditing the Pentagon. On the other hand, as the second Trump administration got underway, Musk clarified, I think accurately, how we would be better suited to understand what Doge fundamentally is. In March, he apparently happened upon somebody tweeting at him with a clip of Barack Obama in 2011 touting an initiative that Obama had announced to streamline the government, modernize the government services, update the technology, which is perpetually antiquated in the government. And according to Musk, what Obama was doing in 2011 was exactly like what Doge was supposedly doing. This was supposed to be, I guess, some big own of Musk's critics, so of frantic Democrats or panicked liberal pundits who were castigating Musk. Musk was trying to tell them, look, this is just the latest incarnation of what your savior Obama was doing. Musk also had said, this was in February, quote, what Doge is doing is similar to Clinton-Gore Democratic policies of the 1990s. The current Democratic Party has just gone so crazy far left that it isn't recognizable anymore. Now, there is a kernel of truth to this. The Doge effort is very much reminiscent of previous efforts in Democratic administrations to cut waste, to get rid of superfluous or redundant expenditures in the federal government, to upgrade technology, which would then produce savings for the taxpayer because it would digitize things that had previously been on paper, et cetera, et cetera. But if this really was just the latest manifestation of a fairly unremarkable, banal, long-standing cross-administration effort to do the basics of kind of advancing the government's architecture and IT systems and personnel systems into a more modern technological era, then why was this being heralded so frenetically, as I recall, as this kind of groundbreaking, earth-shattering initiative that Musk, with his outsized personality and his engineering know-how, was going to bring this like revolutionary energy to? If it's just like the latest version of what Obama and Clinton did, I can't imagine people being that excited had it been initially presented that way. Now, it's notable that Musk eventually figured out that what he was doing was essentially a repeat with some more bells and whistles of what Bill Clinton did in 1993 along with Al Gore. Because if you go back and study a little bit, as I have been doing for the past few days, this Clinton-Gore initiative in the 1990s, it's pretty interesting. And in certain ways, you might even call it slightly more radical than what Musk qua Trump have been doing. Here's a report that Al Gore, who was designated by Bill Clinton to run this reinventing the government initiative, he produced this report in 1996. And if you open this report, you'll see stuff that I guess might be construed as fairly radical, at least in terms of what the Democratic Party's kind of status quo had been. Gore reproduces one of Bill Clinton's most famous and widely commented upon quotes, which is, quote, "The era of big government is over." By 1996, Gore was touting that the federal government workforce had been reduced by 240,000. Now, Musk has also gone through with his wood chipper or his bulldozer or his chainsaw, and he has encouraged or pressured various agencies to reduce their workforce. But this is kind of just a cyclical thing. The Clinton-Gore Democratic administration was celebrating that they had reduced the federal workforce by nearly 240,000 in just 3 years. By the end of the Clinton administration, it was significantly higher. Clinton and Gore even did this thing that Republicans and Democrats both do, which is that they come into office and they somehow discover what seems like a wacky expenditure, something that is absurd, that people would laugh at. They can't believe that the government would actually be funding this. And that becomes then representative of wasteful or capricious government spending. And those anecdotes then are cited for everybody to rally around in terms of why we need to focus on downsizing the government and bringing it up to the modern age. So one thing that Al Gore and Clinton and pundits in that era loved to talk about was that there was this obscure board called the Tea Tasters Board that was a relic of like the early 20th century, I believe, where in order to import tea into the United States, you actually had to have a federal panel that would convene in a warehouse in Brooklyn and taste the various teas and then rate the taste or describe the taste. It wasn't even so much a safety things as a requirement that this board of tea tasters taste the tea. And that was eventually got rid of. And Clinton and Gore were very proud of that. They even say, "We're radically changing government." Wow, sounds amazing. Government workers are being saved from all the illogical and bizarre rules and regulations. We've negotiated better deals for services that the government uses and say we're saving a lot of money, blah, 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 blah. This is kind of boring stuff. This was called the National Partnership for Reinventing Government. Maybe some of these measures were warranted. Maybe they were rational. Maybe they did save some money. But would anybody think back on this and kind of call it some kind of revolutionary overhaul of the federal government or of dismantling the deep state? You could even go and find the archive of the ancient-looking website that Gore, who loves to tout his role in bringing about the internet indirectly, the website's still up. You can go look at it. Is this bulldozing the deep state? Like, if Musk is doing the latest iteration of this, where does the deep state get bulldozed exactly? Now, one thing that was interesting that I came across was this former Doge employee who worked briefly, like for about 6 weeks at Doge. Young guy, software engineer, I believe, seems relatively intelligent. His name is Sahil Levingia, and he wrote a blog post that was published a few days ago on his experience working for Doge. He went in really amped up, really excited, really optimistic. And then he says, quote, "The reality was setting in. Doge was more like having McKinsey volunteers embedded in agencies rather than the revolutionary force I'd imagined. It was Elon in the White House, Stephen Davis coordinating, and everyone else scattered across agencies. Meanwhile, the public was seeing news reports of mass firings that seemed cruel and heartless, many assuming Doge was directly responsible. In reality, Doge had no direct authority. The real decisions came from the agency heads appointed by President Trump, who were wise to let Doge act as the fall guy for unpopular decisions. So, what was Doge exactly if it didn't even have the authority that constantly got imputed to it? And why did this guy writing this blog post presuppose or go into the job assuming that it was going to be this revolutionary force, only to be somewhat disenchanted? I don't know. I guess all this hoopla, all this fanfare gave a lot of people the impression that something revolutionary was happening when it really was just a reheated Clinton-Obama thing with some unique touches. They did take a kind of unapologetic approach to kind of slamming a certain faction of federal employees with ultimatums about how they could take a buyout or how they had to submit by email a performance review, like what are 3 things that you did, or was it 5 things you did last week, et cetera. So that was a bit new. That was Musk bringing, I guess, in his Silicon Valley type ethos. But where did it go wrong in that the deep state hasn't been dismantled? In fact, it seems to have been empowered and further entrenched because the Trump administration is celebrating that they are ushering in $1 trillion Pentagon budgets now. So whatever minimal savings that Doge, whatever its precise role, was able to uncover, and estimates vary on this, it's hard to get especially credible or verifiable information about what tangible savings have been definitively produced. There are some estimates that as of last month, only $15 billion had been conclusively saved by anything that can be traced to Doge, although there are higher estimates, but it's a range. And unless you can get corroboration for the claims of the people within Doge, you can't be absolutely sure that any of the data or the findings that they're citing are valid. But clearly, whatever savings were accrued had nothing to do with dismantling the deep state or going after the Pentagon or doing any other of these so-called revolutionary things that a lot of people have been led to believe were in the offing with Doge. Now, I think this is kind of well represented by the confused and even somewhat cynical conceptualization of deep state that people like Musk evidently have. Here was Musk conversing with none other than Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, in March, where Netanyahu complains that he's basically being tyrannized by the equivalent of the deep state in Israel. He says, whenever a strong right-wing leader wins an election, the leftist deep state weaponizes the justice system to thwart the people's will. They won't win in either place. So he's connecting himself to the heroic saga of Trump and Musk, who also have been pestered and harangued by the so-called leftist deep state in the United States, just as he is allegedly being in Israel. And Musk replies with his little dopey 100 emoticon thing as though he's seconding that definition of the deep state. So now we have such a detached, such a amorphous, such a almost like such an ever-evolving concept of deep state that Netanyahu can position himself against it for political reasons. That just goes to show you that deep state has lost much of whatever utility it once might have had in terms of describing real phenomena in the government. There is a national security bureaucracy. It does tend to transcend partisan administrations, successive partisan administrations, and develop even a kind of autonomy. And it is something that is worth studying and examining. But if we're going to get this superficial, kind of dumbed down, low IQ, partisan or pro-Israel version of a deep state to pacify ourselves with, then the deep state is never going to be actually dismantled. In fact, it's going to be further empowered and further enriched. So let me give you an example. Here's a memo that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, put out in March to chronicle all these far-reaching, long overdue cuts that the Pentagon was making, vaguely under the auspices of Doge, although it's hard to tell what expenditure would necessarily be attributable to Doge in any given instance. But Hegseth did come out and at least claim that there's a new sheriff in town and they're going to be seriously sifting through the bloated Pentagon budget. Wow. Sounds okay. Sounds maybe like what we were sort of vaguely promised in November. Well, I don't know that it's quite that simple. If you look at this memo, the stuff that is focused on in terms of spending to be ceased, spending to be halted, really mostly has to do with culture war type issues that the previous Democratic administration had insinuated into not just the Defense Department, but many departments. Then Trump came in, issued an executive order, basically eliminating, quote, DEI, eliminating gender diversity type programs, eliminating, climate change type programs. And Hegseth announces that those contracts for like DEI services had been canceled, but it's a pittance. It's an infinitesimal fraction of the overall Pentagon budget. It's hardly even worth giving you the full number because it's like in the decimals, 0.02%, something like that, of the overall Pentagon budget. Then on top of that, Hegseth says, yeah, we're going to cancel these contracts, but then we're going to reshuffle the savings into stuff at the Pentagon that we like, stuff at the Pentagon that we say is consistent with Trump's agenda, like refurbishing the various missile systems or updating various facets of the nuclear arsenal. So the savings are just being redirected to other initiatives. But then they're going to claim that these savings are emblematic of a government that is finally living within its means or something.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.